The purpose of this video tutorial is to explain the process of taking an activity diagram and translating that into an outline for your code, which you can then flush out to produce complete code. So in this example, the outline for the code, that is the activity diagram, has already been generated in the tool Innoslate. So familiarity with Innoslate is somewhat helpful, but I will explain what each of the parts are through here. So we've already created our activity diagram from the functional hierarchy, and the activity diagram lays out an overall plan for how we're going to structure the code. So in this case, we can see that we have three main things that happen. We're going to verify some inputs. If those inputs produce good data, then we're going to generate the report. Otherwise, we don't do anything. So each of the little pitchfork here indicates that the activity diagram has been further decomposed into sub-activities. But first, before we do that, we're going to use this top level activity diagram to figure out how we're going to structure the code. So in this case, it seems natural to structure verifying inputs as a separate sub, and then having generate report either its own sub or part of the main sub. So we're going to write this as a main sub, which is going to generate the report, and then a secondary sub, which goes and does the input verification. So switching back to our VBA code, this means, and again, I'm not going to write the entire code or fill out all the details, but this just provides an outline that I'm going to put in the form of comments that you go back in and flush out later. So the idea here is that inputs get verified. So we would have a call to verify inputs. Now notice in this case, we need an output from verify inputs. So rather than using a call, we would use a function. And so this function spits out the result of verify inputs. So that function would be a Boolean. So if verify and then we would go actually, if inputs are verified, we would go do the stuff to generate the report. Otherwise, we're going to not do anything at all, right? So this implies that the user has to get notified about what's happening inside the verify inputs routine. So this is making sure we have good data and then generating the report only if we indeed have good data. So this means we need a sub for verifying the inputs, or a function rather. And we're going to use a return value to be Boolean, which means true or false. So what this function does, the inside of the function, so this is going to return and then if we have bad inputs, they get reported here. So when we go to say what happens internally to verify inputs, now we go to the decomposed activity diagram. And this shows us that we have a structure inside here that we've already planned for in this activity diagram. And so in this structure, we have a loop, which tells us for every cell, we're going to do the following 3 activities. We're going to verify the date contents. We're going to verify that the cell is the correct style. And then potentially we might need to report on this particular error if we found out that that error was bad. Again, I'm not writing the entire code here. I'm just showing you how to outline what happens. So outlining the major parts, not doing the details here. The major parts here is we have planned for a loop as shown on this activity diagram. So we're going to put a loop in here. So I'm going to just write this in, again, not in VBA syntax, but just an outline for what needs to be happen. So what needs to happen inside this loop, right? We need to verify So again, no details on how exactly we're doing this, but we're constructing the outline for what we're going to do when we insert actual code. Okay, so this is the outline for what we're going to do when we verify inputs. And then when we go to write the code, we would flush out the actual code here that constitutes however we're going to verify whether something is a good date or a good style or whatever. We can use this, leave these comments in there, and that helps explain the logic. Or if it seems transparent, you can go delete the comments at a later time. So that's verifying the inputs. Now, as far as generating the report, we can go see what parts constitute generating this report, and then make a decision whether we want to put that in the main sub or have a subsidiary sub. So it sounds like at least, maybe we can have all of this in the main sub. So we're doing this again in a loop that passes through all the cells that we want to use for generating the report. And so this, we need a loop. And then inside the loop, each cell has a way to determine what its entry status is. We determine what that entry status is, and then based on the entry status, we do some kind of processing associated with it. So it seems like a natural way to structure this might be, after we verify the inputs, to actually determine this entry status as a separate function, because we're going to be doing it over and over. And then based on that entry status, we make decisions on what to do in terms of the further processing, based on whether the entry is going to be overdue, upcoming, or complete. So going back to our code, if we look at having determined entry status as being a separate function, we're going to call that function, and this function is going to return a string or an enumerator or something that tells us which of these entry statuses we have. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to make sure that we have the appropriate loop. And that has an ending, and that inside this loop, over and over, we're going to determine the entry status. So this is going to be a function. And then based on the entry status that we have, we're going to do something next. So that's what we're going to do each time we pass through this loop. And then we're going to have a function here, determine entry status. Now, the entry here, we have to be a little bit careful because the loop, the function that we have doesn't contain the loop. It's inside a loop. So we need to tell it which cell that we're processing. So we need to say which entry are we processing. And in VBA, the way we would likely to be doing this is using a range. And then the return value, I'm going to actually have this be an enumerated value. I will set up a separate video on how to use enumerators. But in this example, we're going to use a VBA enumerator. And so that is a separate data type that it's like a kind of like a user defined data type. Okay, so here when we determine entry status, so there's really 4 statuses we could be in: overdue, upcoming, complete, or none of the above. So if none of the above apply to this, that would also be an entry status. So we're going to then determine either processing again, is it overdue, is it upcoming, based on the entry, and then return that value. Okay, so this basically flushes out an outline of the code, and then you would do individual pieces to actually fill out the code and do something here. Now, in this example, we do have further details on what you do to determine whether you have an entry status, which is you go and get the due date from the spreadsheet. And then based on that entry or which entry we're looking at, it may be that if it's complete and we don't need to do anything. If it's not marked as complete, then we need to do some comparison on the dates to figure out what that entry status here. I'm not going to put the outline for the code here because this constitutes putting an if statement to figure out whether or not the entry is actually complete. So again, this tutorial doesn't explain how to actually write the code, but it does explain how to take the design that you have in the form of an activity diagram and then structure this into code that you then would fill out one piece at a time.